All right, well, I've seen a few others come in here and we are at 3:51. So I think that should be sufficient for us to go ahead and get started. So I'm picking up hopefully right around where Tad left off. So I was luckily able to make it to the very ending of the meeting yesterday, but I missed the whole meeting. So if there's any place anyone's stuck, feel free to, chat, interject somehow and let us know. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead and jump into where we were hoping that this should be starting at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, well, there we go. All right, let's open on up chat so I can see anything coming up here. All right, so the goal of today's lab is to actually deploy the app that you've been creating with Tad. And then we're going to add a little bit of a couple other details that are only available once that is deployed. So from Power Apps, if you want to go to the main apps page here, like I have it, and then you want to click on the ellipses and go to details. And it's probably easiest to just keep this page open because we'll need to copy the app ID and the tenant ID here in order to add it as an application into the NXT environment. So next, you can open up a new tab and go to developer.blackbaud.com. And then you want to go to the developer account tab and click on my applications, which should bring you to a page similar to this. So I'm going to go ahead and click add and just start from scratch here. So you want to give your application a name. For you all having it donor service request, donor service app, something like that would make sense. I've got a couple other instances of this in here. So for me, just trying to indicate that it's a little bit different. The details can, be as detailed as you want it to be, or it can just be a repeat of what we already have. For the publisher, I recommend either putting your personal name or you can put your organization name, like I have Blackbaud here. This is if you're actually creating the add-in as a third-party app for people to connect to, then they would see this name and it would be important. But since you all are creating this for your own internal organization uses, it doesn't really matter too much as to what name is going in there. And then same thing for the application website URL. If this was a third-party app, you would want this to be a website where they could go and get more information about the app or the organization. For our purposes, I recommend just putting in your organization main website because no one else is actually going to see it. All right. So once that is saved, we will go ahead in the add-in section here and click on add. And the add-in name, this is also only really seen for the purposes of this application and this add-in screen here. This is not what a user will see when they're actually accessing it from the add-in button. I'll show you that piece down here. So before we add in the URL, let's go ahead and go into Development Office, Constituents, and choose Constituent Page Action. And so then we need to add in the add-in URL. So you can, in the shared documentation, it's kind of broken up a couple different ways, depending on how it's easier for you to see it piece by piece or just looking at that full URL. So since I've worked with this URL a couple of times, I think I feel comfortable with parsing out the pieces I need in here. So what we have to replace in here is the app ID, the tenant ID, and the title. So the app ID we'll access over here from our details page. And that is starting after app ID equals on through the ampersand. And then the tenant ID is just the ending portion of the web link up here. And we'll replace that same thing after the tenant ID equals over to the next ampersand. And then the title is what we see starting after title equals and on through the next ampersand. So this title would come out, if I were to leave it as it is right here, AJM app in a day constituent update request. But I'm going to shorten that a little bit here just so you can kind of see how to change it for your own needs. So maybe I want to say just simple donor service request. So spaces have to be replaced by a % and then 20. So I can have simple %20 donor, %20 service request. That should be good. And these other pieces, if you're curious, this part up here is just telling us that what kind of add-in this is. So this is a Power App add-in. Other types could be a just like a straight web request add-in. After this, we're telling it that it is a button as opposed to perhaps a tile. And then we're telling it down here, what action does it have after you click on the button? Is it a flyout? So we see it over to the right-hand window, or is it a page pop out? I have to double check on the proper term for pop out. And then the width of that flyout. So those portions could be changed if you wanted it to be. But all that looks good. So I'll go ahead and click on save. And then we need to add in the scope. So want to click on edit scopes and we'll say limited data access and give it NXT read access. And this is really just telling it so it can pull some of the data from that RE record and send it back over. All right, so once all of this is in here, then we need to add it to our environment. So from here, go ahead and click up in the upper left corner and go to, or actually, or you click there, copy this application ID. So we need to paste that in this next piece. Go ahead and go to the marketplace. And if you're in the Sky developer environment, you don't actually need to do this step, but anyone not in a Sky developer cohort environment does need to do this step. For the Sky developer cohort environments, it automatically reads and links up what you have in there. So you should be able to see it automatically after adding that application. So once you've selected your environment, if needed, then come over to the Manage tab and say Connect App. Paste in that application ID and then click Connect. We don't need to go to the application website. So then if you actually open up your instance of your environment and whatever environment you are in, and then open a constituent record. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page. All right, now once I click on add-ins, I see that simple donor service request that I just added. So I'll go ahead and click on this here just so we can test it out and see it in action. Hopefully this part works for me. I had to try to create my app up to the point of where you all should have ended yesterday. So yes, this looks good. So for what has currently been built out, say I want to add a new phone number, I could add that in right here. All right. And so it just submitted my app, just like you've been testing from the actual, like playing the app on the Power App side. But now that we actually have that in, we can add some additional context to the app. So we can get some things like the constituent ID and link this back to the record here to make it a little bit more interactive for that information that you're getting through an email. All right, so if there's any questions about what I've already added here, go ahead and feel free to send them onto the chat and I should see those come over. Otherwise, we'll look on adding that context. So to do that, we want to go ahead and edit the app. And then we're going to edit the flow. So technically, you could do this step by accessing the flow directly from Power Automate from the My Flows page. To me, since I'm testing out and doing other things in the app, it's easier to edit from here. And then we wait. All right, so now over here on the left, I can go to my Power Automate icon, and then I'm going to locate my flow and click on edit. All right, and then in my email here, let's add maybe the constituent ID at the beginning. I think in the documentation, I've got it later on down there. That kind of makes more sense to have it earlier up. And then I'll click on see more and choose the new Ask in Power Apps field here. And then at the very bottom, I'm going to create a link to my record. That way, if someone received this, as opposed to just getting that ID and the data that needs to be added or changed, they can go ahead and click on the link and open up the record. So the easiest way to do this is probably just to copy out your URL from the record that you had open, and then paste it into the link portion down here. If this is something where you're currently not in your live environment, just be aware that this link would need to be updated, this portion right here for the environment ID to point to your environment. But if you are in that environment, then that part wouldn't need to be changed. So here for the record though, I'm going to take out the 238 and then choose my same send an email body to value here, because that's the constituent ID I'm passing. So I'm sending the constituent ID both in the new place up here and then within the link itself. So all of that looks good. So I'll go ahead and click on save. And then close out of my flow. And then I can see it is now getting an error because it's smart enough to know that I asked in Power Apps again. So it's expecting an additional value to be sent. So after this, I'm just going to add RAM context underscore record ID, and make sure that I is capitalized, but the D is not, because this is one of the areas where it is case sensitive and it'll yell at us if that's not in there correctly. So now I can go ahead and save and publish my app. Do make sure you always publish. So I don't know if this was something that Tad touched on earlier this week, but especially when you're going between testing and a place like here in the app, where if I were to go to play, it's going to show me whatever I have here, compared to testing on an actual record. Whenever I go over into my Sky environment, it's going to show me the last published version. So if all I did here was save it, but not publish it, then it wouldn't have my updated context record ID parameter that I just put in there yet. But now I'm going to go back to my record over here and refresh. All right, Nicole, good question. I will come back to that one in a second. So go ahead and click on add-ins again. We'll click on this simple donor service request. All right, so it's still picking up that old version, but I can go ahead and tell it to refresh here, and then it should get my latest published version. That's a more recent message that actually told you that. Before, you just had to know to refresh this actual constituent page a few times to make sure it was picking up that new version. So let's send it a new email and go ahead and click on submit. All right, it said I'd been submitted. So I'm just going to see if I can just pause my screen sharing real quick. No, I'm just going to stop. Oh, no, I didn't have a pause share. And bring up my email. Okay. I can go ahead and just reshare. Heard a couple other messages come through and just wanted to be a little aware of what was in here first. All right, but this is the last one here from 410. So I can see it's got my constituent ID in here now, got my email address value I just put in. And if I click on this link, it should be opening back up to that same record. Perfect. All right, so Nicole was asking if there's a way to get the user who actually submitted it. And there is. It is, you kind of need to see it from the flow results itself. So let me open up in a new tab here, Power Automate. All right, I'm in my right environment. And so I'm opening up that same flow that's attached to my app, and then checking my last run history result. So now if I look in this output from the Power Apps side, I should be seeing in my output here. Here we go. MS user email. So that's the email address of the user that submitted it, and then just their name, username, and ID. So say if I want to add in this piece, that's header. If I can remember this, get the format the right way. Doesn't look like that part saved for me, so bear with me 1 second. I don't think I had that in there correctly, but it is something of that format. And I do have a actual value, or I have it in other flows. Just, it's one of these areas where it doesn't show up exactly in your output, but you can get to it by just identifying the correct output of where it's coming out from the Power Apps output. So I will, if we get a bit of a break here, I can double check that from another flow and tell you that piece for sure. Stop copying anything. That's okay. All right, so that's pretty much it. So this one's a lot shorter. Since we do have time here, we can kind of look at a couple of the other pieces on how to make this more advanced. Are there any questions though on just getting out and building out this initial piece, connecting it, and actually having it work up to this point? Awesome, it is. I love this app and flow. All right, so if we, and I don't know if this documentation was provided as part of the lab, the skills lab itself, just because just for the amount of time we have here, we knew we wouldn't have time. So let me go ahead and share this through the chat, or do I share here? Stop share.
Ashley, you should be able to drag and drop something into the chat if you wanted to share a document. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. Thank you. Because
Yeah.
whatever I just clicked on here was not the same link that I had before that was working. Oh, okay. Lab 4 advanced. Okay. So that is coming back your way. And then I'll talk through here a little bit what exactly you should be seeing there. So what lab 4 is going to start going into is making this what we have is kind of the advanced / premium app. So if I come back over here to my record and look at this constituent update request app, we'll see a sample of this come up. So some of this was included in the homework items that were in the lab, like adding the additional fields, like the address, getting the old record, changing the color, setting the visibility, things like that. But where one of the parts it doesn't have is being able to get the existing record. So here, if you go through those steps, we can actually say to pull in existing values too. So as opposed to just sending over or manually typing in what that old value is or the current value is that someone needs to update, I can then click in, like whenever it's activated, I can click into this existing field and choose the address on the record that I want to send. This right now is limited based off of type. So if I were to change this to a different type, like business, then I'm not going to have anything to show up in my drop down because this record doesn't have a business address. You could make that less limited though, to where someone could choose any addresses regardless of type if you wanted. But now I can really say like, okay, I want to replace this existing home address. And whether you're choosing replace or update, in this scenario, replacement, like end date or inactivate the existing one and create a new record. Overwrite was updating the existing record. So say like something was spelled wrong. You don't necessarily want to replace the whole record. You just want to update that value and keep those dates the same. And then I could go through and put in all of my other information and send it over. Using this does require, it'll make your app become a premium app. So that there is different licensing that goes with that. You can, I think I'm not sure, there's different pricing obviously for nonprofits too, but at the minimum, not including nonprofit information, you would at least have to get like a per app license, which is $5 a month to use functionality like that. If you didn't want to make it premium, you could still, go through and put in all the other fields that are there. And that existing field though would have to be something that someone was manually typing. So that's really like the benefit and the plus of where that comes in. Oh, yeah, Eleanor, you took the question right out of my mouth. In addition though to other things that we had in that lab 4 was going through and actually adding this to SharePoint. So in that example, let me come out here. Instead of having everything flow into an email, and you could still have an email notification in this scenario too, but it was flowing into a SharePoint list. So when it's going into the SharePoint list, you have each field represented as a different column in that list. So the action that they're doing, whether it's create new, update existing, replace existing, the record type, the contact type for that record, whether it's primary, and so forth. If you are not using the premium version, so where you're actually connecting that data to pull down in the drop down, and you want to keep functionality like replace or overwrite, then you would have an additional step of someone needing to pull in the IDs here. So that's like the real benefit too of having it automated and having it, the premium portion, is because the ID of the address, email, or phone that you want to change is going to come into this list as well. So that me as the person reviewing this, I can come over here and say, all right, this is approved. And then there would be another flow that would be running on a scheduled basis to actually go and find anything in here that's approved and send that over to Razor's Edge to make the update. Once it updates, then it would update this line item as processed. If you didn't have that portion going in, you could still have pretty much everything else be rather automated. You would just have to have or make sure this link to RE was included. So just like we added into the email there, you would have that same link come out here. And then someone could figure out just manually, I had it going in, not through the link, but providing a summarized like comment over here of their existing records. So I could see here that they said the ID or the email that they selected of that specific type, the ID was 23160. So I would have to manually then type in over here, okay, that's 23160, and that's the record that we're going to overwrite or replace, as opposed to just always adding new or ending the old one. Yep, and thank you, Glenn. That is also a good point. If you're not using the Power App, but you're using a flow, if anyone was in the my skills lab from earlier this week where we were getting the Asana tasks, we were just using a triggered web request from a button there. There we had that validate a user identity token action, and you could get the data like the email address from that as well. And so in the shared document, see, a couple of important things. Let me make this a little bit bigger. All right, so whenever you are adding the items into your attached flow, so the same thing that you went through before where you kind of learned that the order of what you ask in Power Apps is important, the same thing is true here. It does give you a little bit of an added benefit in that I can see now, like once you start adding fields based off of the SharePoint column. Where did I just, okay, yeah, here. So you can see it starts to say like create item title, create item record type based off of that column name, as opposed to just everything create item, send an email, V_1, and so forth. So you can make sure you have that lined up a little bit better. But when it comes to the run statement that you have to add to get everything in here, it doesn't tell you anything new there. So it's all based off of the order of what you selected to add in Power Apps first. So if everything was included, that's on the kind of the built out version, your final run statement is going to end up looking something like this. It looks kind of crazy. But each row on here is a different field or value that we're sending over. This came up yesterday at near the end where someone accidentally asked in Power Apps when they shouldn't have. And that's exactly what I'm doing here is I'm just putting over double quotes, space, double quotes, and then going on to the next one. Not the most elegant way to do things, but it works. And you don't have to recreate everything that you've already done just because you accidentally clicked on that button one time. Some of the portions that you're sending will matter for like getting the correct format. So if you're, say, sending a value and it's blank sometimes, but sometimes not blank, you have to put in some if statements to be able to handle that. So like for information source, I think it's the ones that are free text require the if statement. The ones that maybe are drop downs, or maybe I'm mixing that up, didn't require, I think the ones that are drop downs that are sometimes there require an if statement like state. It's possible someone could enter in a value there and not put in a state. So you have to do an if statement to just account for if that field is blank. And then at the bottom here, same thing. We were, if you're sending the address ID, but the record was for an email address, you just have to tell it what to do in those instances when the address ID would be blank. But all of that and the associated expression that you would need, depending on which fields you choose to include, should be provided in that table. Any other questions? Got officially 2 minutes left, and it'll be the end of our skills lab. Then you all can go on to the final presentation and see who won the innovation awards. Yes. There's some record processing that happens in the back end in RE NXT. I'm working on one a bit ago and getting an error when I test with a dummy phone number. So for phone numbers specifically, there is a backend check that is done on the Razor's Edge phone endpoint to see whether it is a valid phone number. I don't remember the full details of that off the top of my head, but whenever I was doing testing, I basically always had to test with my actual phone number because it does check and verify whether it's a true phone number or not. Yep, that looks right. I would, if you're getting that error, try testing with a valid phone number and see if that works. If that still doesn't work, it's probably something in like your phone number format, like having the parentheses around the area code and then a space after that could be throwing it off because there is that check that goes through to verify that it's a valid phone number.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's confirming what I was thinking what was going on, because it's like I used real numbers and it worked fine, and then I use a dummy number. Formatting is exactly like as it's supposed to be because we took that into account for. So in my app, if a user is trying to put in the wrong format, it doesn't. You can't actually click the submit button because it's
perfect
until it's the exact same format they needed. So I'm like, why is this not working? I'm like, we're in Canada, so I'm like, which database is it going through to even verify? So, but I'm like, that's what I was suspecting, but I wasn't sure. So,
yeah, the first time I encountered that, I was equally stumped, and I was just trying to quickly test things out. I'm like, why does it care, if it's a valid phone number or not? And then one time I finally tested with an actual phone number, and it worked. Glad to see we all experience this though. That made me feel a little bit better.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. If you do have any follow-up questions or run into any issues, feel free to reach out and we will do our best to get you in the right direction.
Thanks, Ashley. All right, I'll wait for everyone to kind of exit out and end the meeting, and we'll see you over for the closing session.